first order of business, I fixed the stand, albeit in a very wonky fashion. I'd give it another month or so before it breaks again. Well, it's been a little bit of a break. I haven't stitched on this for probably like 2 weeks now, ever since finishing the outlines. And it was a nice break. I think I needed to set this aside for a bit and do other things. And now I am ready for it. I'm hungry to start adding that color on and see this thing come to life. So welcome to what I believe is part 4 of this process. I can never remember how many videos I've already done on this one. Oh well, whatever part of the process this is, it's going to be adding the color to this, which could in theory just be a very, very long video to shoot. Or I could maybe cut this up into smaller sections, which I am thinking about real hard. I don't know. I don't know what my plan is. I never know what my plan is. I'll figure it out as I go. But before adding the color on here, there were several debates that needed to be solved. Several, well, I guess it was like 1, maybe 2. I just like to make it dramatic. The big debate was basically, how am I gonna fill in the large sections that have rather large segments, much bigger than I prefer to do satin stitch? You may have been part of my gathering of opinions on Instagram. If not, feel free to go follow me on Instagram and offer your opinions on things like this. It got quite a bit more complex than I expected it to, if I'm being honest. I was originally going in with, basically the 2 options. Should I just do really long satin stitch that's kind of dangerous and makes me worried? Or should I do split stitch? Those were my thoughts. In the process, I very quickly was like, no, satin stitch is not happening on here. But then I wasn't really loving split stitch. And I came up with a new idea of doing bayou stitch, which is a very old and traditional form of stitching. It's basically a form of laid work. Well, not basically, it is like the original form of laid work. Dates back to the 11th century, where you can see it on the Bayeux tapestry, and it starts with a satin stitch base and then has couching stitches over it. So I was like, okay, it's visible, it's noticeable that it's different than regular satin stitch, but it still is based in regular satin stitch, and then it looks more like a design choice rather than being like, oh, these segments are different because they had to be. It felt more to me like these segments are different because I wanted them to be. I'm in charge here. In the process of gathering everyone's opinions on the subject, though, I really thought Bayou was gonna win. I mean, my vote counts for like 50%, so it was gonna win. But the lovely Bodine, am I pronouncing that right? The joy of internet friends nowadays is that you can know someone's name and yet never ever have had to say it out loud. So I'm not sure how it works for other people, but when I'm reading a book or anything and there's a word that I'm not sure how it should be pronounced, I basically skip over it in my head, or I see the word rather than pronouncing the word in my head. So like normally I'm hearing the words that I'm reading in my head as I'm reading, but then it'll be like audio, 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 visual of that word, audio, 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 and I just never make myself actually pronounce it until the day that you have to pronounce it out loud, and then you're like, oh, I don't know, I've never pronounced it in my head. Anyway, that was a long rabbit trail to basically say, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Bodine, aka @tulipandthread. Go follow her on Instagram. She does amazing work. She suggested to me a Japanese stitch called short stitch holding that I had never heard of before. We both instantly started diving in and doing research on this. Admittedly, she did way more than I did because I was stuck on set that day. She was a lifesaver. She gave me so much information on it. And it's basically a process of laying short stitches over a long section of satin stitch to hold it down at intervals. There's not a lot of information out there on it. There's not a lot of like step-by-step tutorials. I instantly fell in love with this stitch and I was like, this is it. This is gonna be the new option. It's amazing, it's perfect. It also is really, really hard to do well. Not just in that it takes a long time, which like all embroidery takes a long time. I'm not ever gonna be like, oh, I didn't wanna do that stitch because it takes too long. Everything takes too long. That's why we do this. But it's also just very particular on the eyes because you're doing it all in the same color, because you're trying to make everything just the right angle, just the right length, hit just the right place in the threads. My eyes hurt after doing just a small section of this to test it out. So that's where I was like, a little bit worried about this. That would be a lot of short stitch holding to put onto this piece, and I don't need to cause my eyes any more stress than they already go through. However, in the process of researching short stitch holding, Bodine also came across diagonal holding. So diagonal holding has the same general principle. It's a way to hold down longer sections of satin stitch that are far too loose, and it's very similar to bayou stitch. It's longer pieces that you do across the original stitches, and then short stitches that you do tacking down those longer pieces of thread. The difference is that it's a little more invisible because you put the long stitches on an angle across your original satin stitch so that it kind of matches the angle of the twist in the thread themselves. So from certain lights, you really can't see it. It blends in a lot. You also do it in a single strand, which makes a big difference. And then on top of that, the article that we found that talked about it suggested using longer stitches than you would expect for the little couching stitches on the very top, which was really good information because even doing bayou stitch, my tendency is to be like, oh, these couching stitches should be really small. But the smaller that you make them, the more it kind of pinches in the thread around it and makes that section noticeable because it's kind of pulling inward. But if you make those couching stitches a little longer, then they blend smoothly into the original satin stitches and they're not nearly as noticeable. So all of that to say, I completely fell in love with diagonal holding. It's still a little finicky, it still takes some time, it still takes a little bit of eye strain, but it's like 20% of the eye strain that I was having on short stitch holding. I am so happy to have found this option. So there was just one other debate that I offered up to the Instagram poll, and that was, where should I start stitching? Because there's so much of it. I had kind of narrowed it down to either starting with those big sections, getting them out of the way now that I knew what I was gonna do, or starting with the castle. There are definitely pros and cons to both. I really liked the idea of doing the castle first because the visual at the end of that will be really cool. The castle will be all in color and everything else around it will be black and white. However, I also do think that I need to do the big sections before I start doing the surrounding areas. It was a very close vote, 49 to 51%, but the castle won, which I'm very happy about because I was leaning in that direction. I'm really excited to see the visual of that castle on there first, and that'll basically blend straight into doing all of the big sections next, because the end of doing the castle will be doing the rocks at the bottom of the castle. From there, I can jump to the clouds, the suns, the side panel, the suns, there's only one sun, you get me, the other big sections. And then it'll be all of those details. The joy, haha, sarcastically she says, of doing the castle first is that there's so many shingles on it. Why are there so many shingles? Well, the unsarcastic part of that joy is that I'll be getting it out of the way early in the process, and I will appreciate myself for that, like 6 months from now. All right, it's time. We gotta get some color on here. I sit there? Well, this room is really echoey, but guess what? It's where I am. Hi. We've skipped a few months now, haven't we? I mean, there's only so much peaceful ASMR stitching that you can put in a video before your viewers fall asleep on you, so. Also, there were like a solid 2 months where I did not work on this thing at all because of moving and everything, which is why I like to really stick with the clocking in and out thing while I'm doing this, because if I say like this took me X amount of months to finish, that's not really reflective of the amount of time I had to work on it at all, because it's already been a long time. But I have at long, very long last finished the castle. Just the castle itself. I still have to do the whole section underneath it. Also the entire rest of the piece. But this does feel like a massive triumph and just a massive step forward, because this little area right here, this section of the piece, is not exactly the most fun to stitch. Are you gonna go now? Okay, bye. This is probably the most concentrated area of tiny segments, like all of those little shingles. Plus there are a lot of colors, and to top it off, being central in this frame has meant that it is quite difficult to sew. I've been holding the frame in some very odd positions in order to get this done. And now it's done. Oh, and if you've noticed that we're in an entirely different location than the beginning of this video, and you didn't see the moving vlog and such, then hi, we moved! There is a lovely element to filming a video that takes months upon months upon months to finish, and that is that things can drastically change in that course of time, whether it's your interest in the project, the amount of free time you have, your filming equipment, your location itself. It makes editing so much fun. But let's talk some beast-related news specifically. I'm just gonna come out and say it. I don't like double-handed stitching. I know, I've tried. I swear I gave it my best shot, but it's just not working for me. My right hand wants to be used. My right hand needs to be used. And when I try to stitch double-handed, my left hand is over there poking around blindly, and my right hand is just floating there, having an existential crisis. It's like when you're watching a little kid try to complete a fairly simple task, but making an absolute mess of it, and on the outside you have to be like, wow, you're doing a good job, way to go! But on the inside you just want to rip it out of their hands and do it yourself in 2 seconds flat. I'm not great with kids. So yeah, I have not been getting any better at double-handed stitching because I stopped doing it in May. On the other hand, there is one new thing that I've been doing and loving: no knots. Several of you suggested that I just try the stab stitches method so that I wouldn't have to tie knots in the end of my thread, which is really like the classic and traditional way to start and end any piece of embroidery floss. You just make little bitty stitches off to the side or in a section that you're about to stitch over in a minute, so they'll all be covered up and won't show, and that's really enough to secure your floss. I'm not doing it to start my pieces because why bother? Tying a normal knot is just faster for me. But I am doing it to end each one, and it is going grandly. So there you go, I am capable of change. And now I'm super excited to finish up the section that will be this video, because I finally get to do the thing that I researched and practiced and got opinions and advice about. It's diagonal stitch holding time. I may have forgotten how to do it. Of course, first I have to go make a new selection of colors from the 133 that are just hanging around in my studio waiting to be used. I'm gonna throw this out there and hopefully not jinx myself. I'd like to finish this section at least by the end of the year. We shall see. So it's done. At least the part that I wanted to get done in this video is done, which is what, like maybe 1/5 of the total piece? 1/5, 1/6, definitely not a fourth. That Robert Frost poem is playing on repeat in my head, but I have promises to keep and miles to go before I sleep. I mean, I'm not going miles, but that's about how this feels right now. But okay, let me clean up all of these floss bits and then wrap this up. I don't currently know which of these colors I'll be needing again on the rest of the piece, so right now I'm just storing them all together with leftover bits of thread, and then, I don't know, I'll organize it all at some point. Do you want to come up here? Yeah. Goody lickins. Oh. Yeah, so there we have it, as far as we're getting in this video. I must say, working on the rocks under the castle was very rejuvenating because it was so much faster than the castle itself. So it made me very excited to get started on the rest of the piece, because I think I can move on to all the rest of the diagonal stitch holding areas, the clouds, the sun, and then the side panels, and it'll be fairly quick to get those filled in, but it'll be like a very major difference to this piece. It'll add a lot of color and a lot of filled in sections all at once. I understand how slow it is to stitch a ton of little shingles or pavement rocks, but sometimes you need a little bit of a faster section to just be like, you can do this, it's okay. You're not gonna be stitching this for the next 10 years. Probably the next 2 though. I will say the time difference is kind of insane. It took me months to get the castle done and only like 2 weeks to do the rocks. And it's like overall almost the same area. Like spatially, it's like the same size of space. I did finish this section before the end of the year, which is what I was hoping for, so huzzah for me. But I think back when I started the whole piece, I was expecting to be much further along by the end of the year. I was gonna look at the amount of hours or the specific amount of time I've spent on this so far, but my phone is over there and there's a puppy on my lap. Final thoughts on the diagonal stitch holding. Love it! I'm so glad that I found this stitch, or rather that Bodine found it for me and showed it to me. Thank you so much for making my day. Ow, there's a lamp there. I think it looks great next to the satin stitch, and all of the different angles of threads really pick up the light in different areas. Great stitch choice, 100% recommend learning diagonal stitch holding, which I do believe I have a tutorial for if you'd care to give that a check it out, or words, if you'd care to check it out. So obviously this video covered a very long stretch of time, and I'm only gonna make one more video about sewing the rest of it, so that's even gonna cover a longer stretch of time. If you'd like to keep up with the progress on the piece in a more day-to-day fashion, then yeah, give me a follow on Instagram. I post more frequent updates on this piece there, and then I post really frequent updates on my stories every time I stitch on it. I am actually going to take a short-ish break on this piece though, because I have something else that I want to stitch, so I'm going to be setting this one aside for however long it takes, so that I can instead work on something else that I was gonna show you, but now there's a puppy on my lap. Hey buddy, can I get up? I'm sorry. Oh, he just settles in more. Come here, you can have the chair. Good boy. Is it your show now? You make a great host. This right here is my next project. We're gonna go now? Okay, bye. And my mic is dying, oh my mic is dying. So yeah, I'm gonna pause on the castle for a little bit, however long it takes me to sew the map of the 100-acre woods from Winnie the Pooh, which is all just outline, so it seems like it won't take that long, but also there's just like tons of little dots everywhere that I'm gonna do with French knots in one strand. So yeah, it might actually take a while. Now that the puppy is off my lap, let me look at some actual time. When did I start this piece? Look at the floofy boys. Okay, so I started this piece at the very end of February, as far as like actually printing it out, tracing it on, all of that. And it's currently mid-November. March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November-ish. So it's taken me longer to finish just that than it did to finish my entire previous Beauty and the Beast piece. Again though, this is why I clock hours, because there were like 2 months in there where I did not stitch at all. I am very interested to find out what my total hour count is going to be on this piece, but I'm not gonna look at it right now. I don't really wanna know until I get to the very end. So we're not calculating that yet. But I will say I just checked and it actually took me almost a month to do the lower pieces here. Basically 8 months to do the castle, less than a month to do the rocks. I'll be back to stitching on this soon and then I'll track my progress. You can follow me on Instagram if you want to see it in the moment. Otherwise, there will be another video out eventually. What's my estimate? I love to give a good estimate and then see if I can meet it. So if that already took me 9 months, again, it just so depends on what's going on in my life and how much time I have to sew. And I have no idea, no clue what will happen in the next year. But as a generous estimate, I think it's gonna be another 2 years. Settle in, folks.